Have you ever done everything in your power, worked late, planned every detail, pushed past exhaustion, only to watch the results slip out of your hands? That hollow feeling in your chest isn't failure. It's the cost of trying to hold the whole world in your grip. You know that moment, don't you? You've spent weeks, maybe months, pouring yourself into something that matters to you. You've stayed late, sacrificing dinners with friends, turning down weekend plans, telling yourself that every extra hour is an investment. You've double-checked the numbers, reviewed the design, rehearsed the speech. Your body is tired, but your mind keeps churning because you believe that if you can just get it all right, you'll finally get that moment of relief. But when the day comes, something shifts. A detail you overlooked, a curveball you couldn't predict, a decision from someone else that unravels your careful work. And instead of the calm you thought would come with completion, you feel your chest tighten, your stomach knot, your mind replaying every step, wondering what you could have done differently. It's like gripping the steering wheel of a car on an icy road. Your knuckles are white, your arms tense, your whole body leaning forward, as if you can will the car to stay straight. You think the tighter you hold, the safer you'll be. But all that tension doesn't give you control, it just makes the ride more exhausting. We live in a culture that praises that grip. From the time we're young, we're told that control is the key to success. Stay on top of it. Make it happen. Don't let it slip. The language is full of grasping, holding, seizing. There's no room for softness. We're taught that life is a game of capture. If you can just grab the right opportunity and hold it tight enough, it will be yours forever. But here's the truth. No one likes to say out loud. Forcing outcomes rarely works the way we imagine. Even when you win, the peace doesn't last. Because deep down, you know the moment you loosen your grip, the thing you fought so hard to hold could slip away. And that knowledge keeps you in a constant low-grade anxiety, a hum of tension under every breath. Buddhism has a word for this: clinging. It's not the same as caring. Clinging is care poisoned by fear. It's saying, I must have this or I can't be okay. When we cling, our nervous system stays on high alert. We scan for threats, real or imagined. We micromanage every detail, convinced that our vigilance is the only thing keeping disaster at bay. A few years ago, I met Ellen, a project manager for a fast-growing tech company. Ellen was known for her reliability. If she was in charge, the work got done, no excuses. She wore her reputation like armor. When a major product launch landed in her lap, she approached it like she had approached every challenge, with absolute control. She built a schedule down to the hour, checked in with every department daily, and personally reviewed every deliverable. She worked 12-hour days, skipped meals, and fell asleep most nights with her laptop still open. The thing about control is that it feels good at first. It gives you the illusion of safety, like wrapping yourself in a thick blanket on a cold night, but it's heavy, and over time, it starts to suffocate you. Ellen didn't see it then. She only saw the finish line, convinced that her effort was the price of success. Launch day came. The team was ready. The marketing was sharp. The website looked flawless. And then, hours before go live, an unexpected shipping delay completely outside her control meant customers wouldn't get their orders on time. Ellen told me later that it felt like the floor fell out from under her. All those months of pushing, all the tension she carried in her shoulders and jaw, all the sacrifices undone by a factor she couldn't touch. What broke her wasn't just the delay, it was the realization that all her effort hadn't made her invincible, that despite doing everything right, she could still lose. And the peace she thought would come from getting it perfect never arrived. That's the hidden cost of gripping too tightly. You hand your peace over to the outcome, and when the outcome doesn't cooperate, you're left empty-handed. It's a game you can't win for long. If you've ever tried to hold water in your hands, you know the feeling. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes between your fingers. The water was never meant to be trapped, it was meant to flow. And so is life. I've seen this pattern in so many people, in athletes who overtrain until they burn out, in parents who try to manage every second of their child's life, in leaders who micromanage their teams until creativity dries up. In each case, the intention is good, to protect, to guide, to ensure success. But when that intention hardens into control, it becomes the very thing that kills the joy of the process. Control feels like protection, but it's often just pressure in disguise. And the more we believe we must have things go a certain way to be okay, the more fragile our peace becomes. Ellen's story stayed with me because it's so familiar. I've felt that same tightness in my chest, the same disbelief when something outside my control unraveled my plans. It's tempting to respond by gripping even harder next time. But here's the paradox. The harder you grip, the less room you have to move when life shifts, as it always will. And so, the first step toward a different way of living is simple, but not easy. Notice the grip. Notice when your body tenses, when your mind starts scripting and re-scripting the future. Notice how much of your effort is about preventing something from going wrong, rather than moving toward what feels right. Because until you see the weight of the grip, you'll keep carrying it, believing it's the only thing holding you up. Why forcing fails? When you're caught in the cycle of forcing, it feels like you're doing the responsible thing. You tell yourself you're being proactive, thorough, committed, but there's a difference between caring deeply and gripping desperately, and it's a difference you can feel in your body. Think about the last time you really tried to force something to happen. Maybe it was a conversation, a project, an outcome you thought was right. What happened in your body? Did your shoulders pull up toward your ears? Did your breathing become shallow? Did you clench your jaw without realizing it? These physical signs are more than stress. They're the body's way of saying, you're bracing for a fight. And when you live braced, you're not flowing. You're not present. You're in a constant state of negotiation with reality, trying to twist it, push it, bargain with it, as if the right combination of effort and willpower could make the uncontrollable obey. In much of Western culture, this state is celebrated. We glorify the grind as if it's a badge of honor. We repeat phrases like, no pain, no gain, or sleep when you're dead, and we admire the people who push through exhaustion to get the job done. But here's what's rarely said. The grind often produces diminishing returns. You may get more done in the short term, but over time, the cost to your clarity, your creativity, and your health outweighs the extra hours you put in. I once worked with Daniel, a young athlete training for a national championship. He was naturally talented, but talent wasn't enough for him. He wanted certainty. He doubled his training sessions, meticulously studied his opponents, and tried to control every aspect of his preparation. He monitored his sleep, his diet, even the temperature of his training environment. On paper, it looked like dedication, but in reality, he was suffocating his own performance. In the weeks before the competition, Daniel started making small mistakes. His reaction time slowed. His movements lost their fluidity. He became tense in moments that used to be automatic. His coach noticed it first. "You're thinking too much. You're trying too hard." Daniel didn't want to hear it, he thought. Trying hard was the point. But the truth was, his muscles were tight, his mind was locked, and his body had no room to adapt. The irony is that his over-control was the very thing undermining his chances. In trying to prevent failure, he had created the conditions for it. His energy wasn't going into the flow of the game, it was trapped in the constant loop of, "Don't mess this up, don't mess this up." Buddhism names this loop as suffering born from craving. The craving here isn't just for the win, it's for certainty, for safety, for control over what can't truly be controlled. And the more you try to hold it, the more it slips. It's like standing on a beach, building a sand castle right at the water's edge. You pile up the walls, smoothing each tower, proud of your creation. But the tide is coming in. You can scramble to shore up the walls with handfuls of sand, desperately patting them into place. But no matter how hard you work, the water will rise. You might delay the collapse for a few minutes, but eventually the ocean will reclaim it. Forcing is the same. You can delay the inevitable for a while, but you can't stop life from moving. And in the process, you often drain yourself so much that when the wave comes, you have nothing left to meet it with. Daniel eventually learned this the hard way. He lost his match, not because he wasn't prepared, but because he was so tight he couldn't adapt when things shifted. In the weeks after, he admitted that he hadn't enjoyed a single moment of the competition. It had all been about holding on to control, and that's not the same thing as winning. That's why forcing fails. It mistakes tension for strength, control for care. True care leaves space for movement. True strength is flexible. The bamboo survives the storm because it bends. Intention versus attachment. In the language of Buddhism, there's a subtle but powerful distinction between intention and attachment. On the surface, they can look almost identical. Both involve aiming toward a goal. Both require effort. Both can be fueled by strong emotion. But the energy underneath them is completely different. And it's that energy that determines whether your actions bring peace or exhaustion. Intention is clear, steady, and open. It says, "I move in this direction because it feels right, because it aligns with my values, because it matters to me. I will give my whole heart to it, and I will meet whatever comes with presence." Attachment, on the other hand, is rigid and conditional. It says, "I must have this outcome, or I can't be okay. If this doesn't happen exactly as I imagine, everything will fall apart." One is rooted in trust, the other in fear. One is an offering, the other is a demand. When Ellen and I sat down after her exhausting product launch, she realized she had started with intention, wanting to create a successful, smooth launch for her company and her team. But somewhere along the way, that intention had hardened into attachment. She wasn't just working toward a good launch. She was working to guarantee perfection, to prove something about her worth. That shift changed everything about her experience. Instead of feeling energized, she felt constantly under siege, as if one wrong move would collapse the whole project and her value along with it. I've seen this happen in so many areas of life. A person begins a new relationship with genuine curiosity, wanting to know the other person, to build something beautiful together. But soon, the joy of discovery turns into the fear of loss. This relationship must last forever, or I'll be devastated. And suddenly, every disagreement feels like a warning sign, every moment of distance like a looming disaster. The difference is the same as standing in a river versus trying to dam it with your hands. With intention, you plant your feet in the current, you know the direction you're heading, and you adjust when the water changes. You're grounded but responsive. With attachment, you try to block the flow, forcing the water to behave the way you think it should. It's exhausting and ultimately impossible. I remember talking with a man named Carlos, a small business owner who had built his cafe from the ground up. When he started, his intention was simple: create a warm, welcoming space where people could gather over good coffee. But as the business grew, his goals shifted. He became fixated on winning a local Best Cafe award. At first, he told himself it was just a fun milestone, but over time it became a measuring stick for his worth as an owner. He began obsessing over every customer review, redesigning the menu weekly, and micromanaging his staff. The irony? The more he tried to control every detail, the less enjoyable the cafe became for him, his employees, and even his customers. Staff turnover increased. Regulars started drifting to other spots. And the award? It never came. Carlos was living from attachment, not intention. His desire to serve his community had been replaced by the need to validate himself through recognition. And when that recognition didn't arrive, it left him bitter and burnt out. What Carlos and Ellen both learned is that intention allows for flexibility, while attachment does not. Intention lets you adapt when things change. Attachment sees change as a threat. Intention focuses on the process. Attachment is obsessed with the result. And here's the real kicker: attachment can actually sabotage the outcome you're clinging to. Just like Carlos's cafe lost its warmth and Ellen's launch lost its joy, attachment tightens your energy, narrows your vision, and pushes away the very thing you want to draw closer. One of the simplest ways to check whether you're acting from intention or attachment is to notice how you feel when you think about your goal. If there's spaciousness, if you can breathe fully while imagining both success and failure, you're likely in intention. If your chest tightens, your breath shortens, and your mind leaps into catastrophic what-ifs at the idea of not getting it, you're probably in attachment. This is where mindfulness comes in. The moment you notice attachment creeping in, you can pause and ask yourself, what was my original intention here? Am I still acting from that place, or have I shifted into fear? That question alone can bring you back to the grounded, open energy that makes action sustainable. Because here's the truth: you can't control the river. You can only choose how you stand in it, how you move with it, and how you meet what it brings. The river and the ground. One of the most vivid ways to understand the difference between forcing and flowing is to picture yourself standing in a river. The water is alive, it moves constantly, carrying leaves, branches, and the faint glimmer of fish darting beneath the surface. The current changes from moment to moment. Sometimes it's gentle, lapping softly at your waist. Sometimes it surges, tugging at your legs with surprising strength. When you stand in that river, you have choices. You can fight the current, digging your feet into the sand and pushing against the water, trying to force it back the way it came. You can thrash, splash, exhaust yourself in the attempt to make the river obey. Or you can stand steady, plant your feet, feel the ground beneath you, and learn to move with it. The river, in this metaphor, is life events, changes, people, outcomes you can't control. The ground beneath your feet is your intention, your values, your truth, the part of you that remains steady even when everything around you shifts. When you live with intention, you're like that grounded figure in the water. You don't need the river to change for you to stand tall. You can lean when the current leans, bend when it surges, and straighten when it softens. You don't waste energy resisting what is. You use your energy to respond to it. I think of my friend Lila when I picture this. She's a photographer who, for years, chased the perfect shot. She'd planned shoots down to the minute, imagining exactly what she wanted to capture. And when reality didn't match her vision, when the light shifted too quickly or the subject moved unexpectedly, she'd grow tense and frustrated. The joy that had first drawn her to photography began to fade. One autumn afternoon, she was out in the park, trying to photograph the way the golden leaves caught the late afternoon sun. She'd found the perfect spot, set up her tripod, adjusted her settings, and then a group of children came barreling through, scattering the leaves and laughing loudly. Her first impulse was irritation. They were ruining the shot she'd worked so hard to set up. But something in her paused. She took a deep breath, loosened her grip on her plan, and let herself watch them. One little girl began twirling, arms wide, her hair catching the light as the leaves swirled around her. Instinctively, Lila raised her camera and snapped the photo. That image, completely unplanned, became one of her most beloved works. That's the river and the ground in action. Lila stayed rooted enough in her intention, capturing beauty to adapt when the current shifted. She didn't cling to the original plan so tightly that she missed what was right in front of her. The thing about rivers is, they have a life of their own. You can step into the same river twice, but it won't be the same river, and you won't be the same person. Everything changes, constantly. When you accept this, you stop wasting your life trying to freeze what's meant to move. There's a quiet power in that acceptance. It's not passivity, it's presence. It doesn't mean you stop making plans or aiming for goals. It means you hold those plans lightly, knowing that they may need to bend, shift, or even dissolve. And here's something else. When you're grounded, you actually become more effective, not less. Think of a martial artist facing an opponent. The strength doesn't come from locking every muscle. It comes from balance, flexibility, the ability to shift weight in an instant. A rigid fighter is easy to topple. A grounded, fluid fighter can adapt to anything. Life will throw currents at you, sudden changes in your work, unexpected turns in relationships, health challenges, losses, surprises both joyful and difficult. You don't have to like every current, but you can learn to meet them without panicking. You can learn to move with what's real instead of clinging to what you wish were happening. Buddhist teaching reminds us that this adaptability is a form of wisdom. It's not about being passive or resigned, it's about seeing clearly. This is the water I'm in right now. This is how it's moving. How can I meet it skillfully? The more you practice standing in the river this way, the more you notice something subtle. You're not wasting energy on resistance anymore. That energy can go into action, creativity, connection. You start making decisions not from fear, but from clarity. And, ironically, that often brings you closer to the outcomes you hoped for, not because you forced them, but because you were steady enough to meet the moment when it arrived. Lila told me later that the dancing girl photo taught her more about her art than any workshop or tutorial. It taught her that the best shots come when she's open enough to receive them, and that openness only comes when she's not fighting the river. So here's the invitation. Plant your feet in the ground of your intention. Feel the current. Move with it. Let the river be the river. Your job is not to control its flow, it's to stay steady in your truth as you travel with it. Loosening without letting go. Letting go is one of those phrases that can sound deceptively simple. People throw it around casually. Just let it go, as if it were a light switch you can flip off. But in reality, letting go is often a delicate, layered process. And perhaps the biggest misunderstanding is this. Letting go does not mean giving up. It doesn't mean you stop caring, lose your ambition, or walk away from what matters. It means you stop gripping so tightly that you crush the very thing you're trying to protect. Picture a gardener planting seeds. She prepares the soil, waters carefully, places the seeds at the right depth. Then she covers them, steps back, and lets them grow. She doesn't dig them up every morning to check their progress. She doesn't pull at the sprouts to make them taller faster. She knows her role, to nurture, not to control. This is what loosening without letting go feels like. You still tend to your dreams, your relationships, your projects. You still give them time, attention, and care. But you stop strangling them with the need for a guaranteed outcome. You trust that, with the right conditions, they'll grow in the way they're meant to. Ellen learned this the hard way. After the launch that nearly broke her, she faced another big project months later. Part of her wanted to revert to the old ways, micromanaging every step, hovering over every detail. But she remembered the toll it had taken, so this time she tried something different. She still worked hard, but she also set boundaries. She left the office at a reasonable hour. She delegated tasks and actually trusted her team to handle them. She made room for rest. And when problems inevitably arose, and they always do, she was able to respond with clarity instead of panic. She didn't waste energy blaming herself for things beyond her control. She didn't spiral into worst-case scenarios. She handled what she could, released what she couldn't, and kept moving. The project wasn't perfect, but perfection was no longer the point. The point was to do the work well and keep her peace intact, and she succeeded. The truth is, loosening your grip is often more productive than tightening it. When you're tense, your vision narrows. You miss opportunities, overlook solutions, and push away the very help you need. When you're relaxed, rooted in intention but not clinging to outcome, you can see more clearly, act more wisely, and adapt more quickly. I once spoke with a mountain climber who described it perfectly. He said that when you're climbing a steep rock face, your instinct is to cling to the rock as tightly as possible. But gripping too hard burns your energy and tires your muscles. The key, he said, is learning to hold on just enough to stay safe, but loose enough to move. If you don't loosen your grip, he told me, you'll freeze where you are, and freezing is how people get stuck, or worse. Life is much the same. If you grip too hard on your plans, your identity, your expectations, you lose the ability to move when life changes course. You become rigid, brittle, breakable. Loosening the grip gives you flexibility. It gives you resilience. And yet, loosening is not the same as letting go entirely. It's not resignation or apathy. You still care. You still show up. You still put your heart into the work. You simply release the part of you that demands a specific shape or timeline for the result. In relationships, this might mean loving someone fully without trying to mold them into who you think they should be. In work, it might mean giving your best to a project without tying your self-worth to whether it wins awards or makes headlines. In personal growth, it might mean committing to the process without obsessing over how fast you should be progressing. Buddhist wisdom calls this balance right effort. Effort that is steady, wholehearted, and free from obsession. It's not about working less, it's about working from a place of clarity instead of compulsion. There's a quiet strength that comes from this way of being. It's not the dramatic, adrenaline-fueled rush of forcing things into place. It's the grounded confidence of knowing you can meet whatever comes. It's a strength that doesn't need everything to go right in order to feel at peace. I think of it like sailing. You set your course, you adjust your sails to catch the wind, but you don't control the wind, you work with it. Some days it carries you swiftly, other days it dies down and you drift. If you fight it, if you demand that the wind blow the way you want, you'll exhaust yourself and get nowhere. But if you learn to read it, respect it, and move with it, you'll find your way. The art of loosening without letting go is about learning that balance. It's about showing up with all your heart and then stepping back enough to let life do its part. It's about trusting that you are capable, resourceful, and resilient enough to navigate whatever the river or the wind brings. And perhaps most importantly, it's about remembering that peace is not something you earn by achieving the perfect outcome. Peace is something you choose, moment by moment, by how you meet the unfolding of life. So ask yourself, where in your life are you gripping so tightly that you've lost your ability to move? And what might happen if you loosen just a little without letting go? From clinging to wholesome desire, two kinds of wanting. Not all wanting feels the same. Some desires make you feel lighter, clearer, more alive. Others leave you restless, hollow, and endlessly chasing. The difference isn't just in what you want, it's in the quality of the wanting itself. In Buddhist teaching, this difference is explained through two Pali words, chanda and tanha. Both translate loosely to desire, but they are as different as a gentle breeze and a raging storm. Chanda is wholesome desire. It's the natural pull toward something meaningful, aligned, and life-giving. It doesn't come from a place of lack or fear, it comes from clarity. It says, "This matters to me. I want to move toward it because it feels true." When you act from chanda, your peace doesn't depend on the result. Even if things turn out differently than you imagined, you remain whole. Tanha, on the other hand, is craving. It's the restless hunger that whispers, "Once I have this, I'll finally be okay." It narrows your vision, tightens your body, and fills your mind with what-ifs and not enough. And even when you get what you crave, the satisfaction fades quickly, replaced by the next thing and the next and the next. The difference is subtle in theory but profound in experience. I once knew a musician named Claire who embodied this difference over the course of her career. When she first started playing the violin, she was driven by pure joy. She loved the sound, the feel of the strings under her fingers, the way music could fill a room and shift the mood of everyone in it. She practiced for hours, not because she had to, but because she lost herself in it. That was chanda, wholesome desire. But as Claire entered competitions and auditions, something shifted. The joy of playing faded into the pressure to win. Her practice sessions became battles against mistakes. Every performance was measured in rankings and applause. She began comparing herself to others constantly, always scanning for who was better. Her playing was still technically excellent, but her spirit was tight, her joy drained. That was tanha, craving in action. Buddhism doesn't say desire itself is the problem. It says that craving, the desperate, clinging kind of desire, is the root of suffering. Chanda, in contrast, is a path to growth, connection, and fulfillment without the chains of fear. Think about the last time you wanted something deeply. Did you feel open, engaged, and alive while moving toward it? Or did you feel tense, pressured, and afraid of losing it? That feeling tells you which kind of desire you were in. The good news is, you can shift. You can catch yourself when you've slipped from wholesome desire into craving, and you can return to acting from chanda. It starts with awareness, seeing the difference, and with asking a simple but powerful question: am I moving toward this because it feels aligned, or because I'm afraid not to have it? When craving wears a beautiful mask, one of the most deceptive things about craving is how easily it can disguise itself as something noble. On the surface, it can look like ambition, dedication, romance, or even spiritual aspiration. But underneath, the energy is tight, urgent, and rooted in fear. Craving doesn't always show up as greed or obsession in obvious ways. Sometimes it dresses itself in the clothes of self-improvement. I just want to be the best version of myself. Sometimes it wears the language of love. I can't live without you. Sometimes it even hides under the robe of spiritual goals. If I meditate harder, I'll reach enlightenment faster. The common thread is the belief that your peace, your worth, or your identity is incomplete until you get the thing you want. And when you believe that, you grip, you chase, you exhaust yourself. I once met a man named David at a meditation retreat. On paper, he seemed like the perfect student, first to arrive for every session, last to leave the hall, always asking the teachers for extra guidance. But there was a tension about him that was hard to miss. His questions weren't just curious, they were desperate. How do I get rid of all my thoughts? How do I get to the next level? How do I make sure I'm progressing fast enough? David wasn't meditating to be present. He was meditating to arrive somewhere else, as if the present moment was just a stepping stone to the real peace he imagined would come later. He had turned his practice into another form of craving, only this time the object wasn't money or status, but a particular idea of enlightenment. And here's the trap. When craving wears a beautiful mask, it's harder to question. If David had been chasing a flashy sports car or a big promotion, it would have been easier to see the attachment. But because his craving was wrapped in the language of spiritual growth, it felt almost blameless, admirable even. The same can happen in our careers. I knew a non-profit leader named Sarah who started her work with genuine chanda, wholesome desire to make a difference in her community. She poured herself into the mission, finding joy in connecting people to resources, watching lives improve. But over the years, she became fixated on expanding her organization's reach, winning more grants, and gaining recognition from national publications. At first, those goals seemed aligned with her mission, but the more she chased them, the more she found herself cutting corners, burning out her staff, and measuring success solely in numbers. She was still helping people, but the energy had shifted. What once felt like service now felt like a race she could never win. This is what makes craving so insidious when it hides behind a good cause. It can keep you running long after the joy is gone. It can make you believe that exhaustion is proof of commitment, that sacrificing your well-being is the only way to prove you care enough. Buddhism invites us to look beneath the mask and ask, what's really driving me? If the answer is fear, fear of not being enough, fear of being forgotten, fear of missing out, then no matter how noble the goal, craving has taken the wheel. And when craving drives, the road is always the same. Temporary highs followed by the low of not enough once more. You might get the award, the recognition, the achievement, but it won't fill the space you were trying to fill. It never can, because that space isn't out there in the world. It's in you. The shift comes when you can pursue the same actions, building a career, deepening a relationship, dedicating yourself to a cause, but from chanda instead of tanha, from clarity instead of fear, from fullness instead of lack. For David, that meant softening his grip on the idea of enlightenment and returning to the simple act of sitting with his breath. For Sarah, it meant remembering why she started her non-profit in the first place and letting that original intention, not the chase for recognition, guide her decisions. Because in the end, craving in disguise is still craving, and no matter how beautiful the mask, it will always keep you running toward a finish line that disappears as soon as you get close. The power of chanda, acting without strangling. Wholesome desire, chanda, has a very different texture from craving. When you move from chanda, there's effort, yes, but it's effort without the clenched jaw, without the tight shoulders, without the mental soundtrack of, what if this doesn't work? It's a movement towards something that matters, not a flight from something you fear. When desire is wholesome, there's room to breathe inside it. You can take action without suffocating the thing you care about. You can hold your dream in open hands, allowing its space to grow and change. I once worked with a group of community volunteers restoring an old neighborhood park. The project leader, Anita, was the embodiment of chanda in motion. She cared deeply about the park's revival, not because she needed her name on a plaque, but because she wanted children to have a safe place to play and neighbors to have a place to gather. Her energy was contagious. She didn't micromanage. She trusted each volunteer to bring their strengths to the table. When a shipment of plants arrived late, she shrugged and said, "All right, we'll plant them next week. Let's focus on the benches today." When someone suggested a change in the layout, she listened, weighed the idea, and often said yes. The result? People kept showing up, not out of obligation, but because they felt good being there. The park bloomed into life, not just physically, but as a hub of connection. And Anita didn't burn out, because she wasn't trying to strangle the project into matching a rigid vision. She was holding it lightly enough for it to breathe. Chanda is like standing in that river we spoke about earlier, feet steady, body responsive. You're in motion, but you're not fighting the water. You're aware of your destination, but you're not demanding that every current push you there in a straight line. You trust yourself to navigate, and you trust the river to carry you forward. The irony is, this kind of trust often leads to better results. When you stop clinging to a single image of success, you can notice opportunities you would have otherwise ignored. You can pivot when needed, adapt to unexpected changes, and even welcome surprises. Contrast that with craving. When you act from tanha, your vision narrows. You reject anything that doesn't match your pre-approved plan. You spend energy resisting what is, instead of working with it. It's like trying to grow a garden, but refusing to plant anything except one kind of flower in one exact spot, ignoring the soil, the light, and the seasons. With Chanda, you still plant seeds, but you also listen to the land. You notice which spots get more sun, which plants thrive together, which need more time. You're in relationship with the process, not in battle with it. One of the hallmarks of Chanda is that it doesn't make your self-worth dependent on the outcome. If the park project had fallen through, Anita would have been sad, sure, but it wouldn't have shattered her sense of who she was. She wasn't doing it to prove she was capable or to fill some internal void. She was doing it because it felt true. And truth, unlike ego, doesn't collapse when plans change. In your own life, you can test for Chanda by asking, if this doesn't work out exactly as I hope, will I still be glad I tried? If the answer is yes, you're likely in wholesome desire. If the answer is no, if the thought of not getting the result makes your chest tighten and your stomach drop, you may have crossed into craving. Acting from Chanda doesn't mean you won't feel disappointment when things don't go your way. It just means you won't crumble. It means you can feel the loss without losing yourself. And here's the deeper gift. When you act from Chanda, the process itself nourishes you. You're not postponing your peace until the finish line. You're living it along the way. Anita still visits the park every week. Sometimes she brings her coffee and just sits on one of the benches, watching kids play, dogs run, and neighbors chat. This, she told me once, was always the real goal. The rest was just details. That's the power of Chanda. It lets you carefully, work diligently, and still be free. It lets you act without strangling, build without burning out, love without losing yourself. Recognizing your true motivation. One of the simplest yet most transformative practices in shifting from craving to wholesome desire is learning to pause and ask yourself, why am I doing this? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. I'm doing this to succeed. I'm doing this because I care. I'm doing this to help. But beneath the surface, there is often another layer, a quieter motivation that drives your actions more than you realize. And if that hidden driver is fear, insecurity, or the need to prove yourself, even the most noble action can become exhausting. Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from acting in alignment with your deepest values rather than from the push and pull of ego. But to do that, you need to be honest with yourself about what's really moving you. I once worked with a writer named Tom. On the outside, Tom seemed disciplined and inspired. He woke up early every morning to write before work, submitted short stories to magazines, and posted regularly on his blog. But when we began talking about his process, a pattern emerged. He admitted that most of his creative choices were dictated by what he thought editors wanted, not what he actually wanted to express. At first, he defended it as practicality. If I want to make it as a writer, I have to write what sells. But as we dug deeper, he realized it wasn't just strategy, it was fear. Fear that his authentic voice wasn't good enough. Fear that if he wrote what mattered most to him, it wouldn't be accepted. Tom was living in craving disguised as ambition. His work was technically successful, but it didn't feed him. He often felt drained after writing, not because writing is inherently tiring, but because he was constantly filtering himself through the imagined expectations of others. Recognizing his true motivation changed everything. Once he saw the fear underneath, he could choose differently. He began carving out time each week to write purely for himself, with no plan to publish. At first, it felt indulgent, almost irresponsible, but those private pages became the most joyful, alive writing he'd done in years. Ironically, when he later shared some of those pieces, they were the ones that resonated most deeply with readers. This is the paradox. When you act from genuine alignment rather than from fear, your work often becomes more powerful, not less. People can feel the difference. They might not be able to name it, but they sense when something is born from truth rather than from the desperate need to be approved of. To recognize your true motivation, try this simple reflection before you start a task, pursue a goal, or make a big decision. Ask, why this? Why am I drawn to this specific action or goal? Ask, why now? Am I moving toward this from excitement and alignment, or am I rushing because I fear missing out? Ask, what if? If this didn't turn out as I hoped, would I still feel this was worthwhile? If your answers feel open, grounded, and steady, you're likely in Chanda wholesome desire. If they feel tight, anxious, or defensive, craving may have taken the wheel. I've found that being honest with yourself about motivation is a kind of liberation. You don't have to shame yourself for having fear or craving. They're human. But the moment you see them clearly, you have a choice. You can either let them run the show, or you can choose to act from a deeper place. And over time, the more you practice recognizing your true motivation, the easier it becomes to catch craving before it drives you into overwork, burnout, or hollow victories. Because in the end, the goal isn't just to get what you want, it's to want in a way that lets you stay whole while you reach for it. When fullness comes from within, the ultimate shift from craving to wholesome desire happens when you stop looking for wholeness outside yourself. It's when you realize that your peace, your worth, and your sense of self are not waiting at the end of some perfect achievement. They are here, now, in how you show up to the moment. Craving tells you, once I have this, I'll be okay. It dangles peace like a prize at the end of a long race. But even if you reach that prize, the feeling is temporary. Soon, the mind will find another finish line to chase. Wholesome desire, Chanda knows that you are already whole. It says, I move toward this because it feels alive, not because I need it to complete me. That's why acting from Chanda feels lighter, freer, more joyful. You're no longer bargaining with your happiness. You're simply expressing it. I think of Maya, a teacher I once met at a mindfulness training. She loved her work, guiding young children through their earliest years of learning, but she often felt overlooked. She dreamed of being named Teacher of the Year, imagining how it would finally prove her value to her colleagues and community. Year after year, the award went to someone else. Each time, Maya told herself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. She worked harder, stayed later, took on extra projects, not out of joy, but out of the hope that this would be the year. And each time she was passed over, the disappointment cut deeper. One day, during a reflective exercise, she realized that the moments she felt most alive in her work had nothing to do with recognition. They were the quiet ones, kneeling beside a child to help them sound out a word, watching a shy student raise their hand for the first time, hearing a parent say, "My child loves coming to school now." It hit her those moments were the real reward. They weren't shiny or public, but they were genuine. And they were happening every day, whether or not she had a plaque on the wall. From that point on, Maya's energy shifted. She still worked hard, but the drive for the award faded. She began to focus on the classroom itself, on the joy of teaching, on the relationships with her students and their families. Ironically, the following year, she did win the Teacher of the Year award, but by then it felt like a pleasant surprise, not the validation she'd been chasing. That's the paradox. When you stop needing the outcome to prove your worth, you often create even better outcomes. Because you're no longer tense, no longer grasping, no longer distorting your actions to fit an image of success. You're simply present, and that presence is magnetic. Fullness from within doesn't mean you stop dreaming or striving. It means your dreams are no longer rooted in the belief that you're incomplete. You still want to grow, create, connect, but you do it from a foundation of self-trust. Buddhist wisdom teaches that this inner fullness is your natural state. It gets obscured by the dust of craving, but it's never gone. When you pause, breathe, and let go of the need to be enough in someone else's eyes, you start to feel it again. You might notice it in small, ordinary moments, sipping your coffee slowly in the morning, walking without rushing, listening to someone without planning your reply. It's the quiet contentment that comes from simply being, without needing the moment to be different. And when you move from that space, your desires become expressions of love rather than demands for proof. You write the book because you love the words, not because you need to sell a certain number of copies. You build the business because you love the work, not because you need to outshine someone else. You fall in love because you cherish the connection, not because you need another person to fix the loneliness inside you. When fullness comes from within, life stops feeling like a constant audition. You stop performing and start participating. You stop holding your breath for the big moment and start realizing that every moment is part of the big moment. The truth is, the peace you think you'll feel when you get there is already available here. You don't have to wait. You just have to stop making it conditional. So here's the question. If you didn't need to prove anything, if you already felt whole, what would you choose to want, and how would you move toward it? The pressure of the invisible clock. Have you ever felt like you're running a race you never signed up for? A race with no starting gun, no clear course, but a constant ticking in your ear telling you that you should be further along by now. That ticking isn't always literal. It's the invisible clock we carry inside us. It's the voice that says, by 25 I should have my career figured out. By 30 I should own a house. By 40 I should have it all together. These are not biological deadlines, they are cultural ones, and they can be just as suffocating as any real timer. I once worked with a client named Rachel, a marketing manager who seemed to have everything under control, but she confessed she felt behind compared to her peers. Several of her friends were buying houses, getting married, or having children, and each social media post about a milestone sent her spiraling into anxiety. Rachel had internalized an invisible timeline, a mental checklist of when certain life events were supposed to happen. The irony, many of the items on that checklist weren't even things she truly wanted in the near future. She enjoyed living in the city, didn't feel ready for children, and loved the freedom of renting. But because the clock was ticking in her mind, she felt constant pressure to rush toward milestones that weren't hers to begin with. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering comes from resisting what is, wanting the moment to be something other than what it is right now. and nowhere is this more evident than in our relationship with time. When we believe we're late, we start to push, force, and strain against the natural rhythm of our lives. This invisible race often starts early, from school grades to sports achievements, from college admissions to job promotions. We're conditioned to measure ourselves against fixed timelines, and if we fall behind, shame creeps in. We forget that these timelines are invented. They're not laws of nature, they're social agreements, and we have the power to question them. The problem with living by the invisible clock is that it steals your presence. Instead of inhabiting the life you actually have, you live in a constant mental projection of where you should be. Every delay feels like a failure, every pause like a problem to be solved. Rachel eventually realized that her anxiety wasn't coming from her actual life. It was coming from comparing her life to a schedule she never consciously agreed to. When she started questioning that schedule, space opened up. She began to see that her so-called delays were actually choices aligned with her values, and in that recognition, the ticking grew quieter. The first step in living in the flow of time is to notice the invisible clock. Whose timeline are you living on, and do you want to keep it? Releasing the timeline without losing responsibility. Letting go of rigid timelines doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It doesn't mean drifting aimlessly through life or using "I'm just going with the flow" as an excuse to avoid commitments. True freedom from the invisible clock is not about doing less. It's about aligning what you do with what genuinely matters to you, rather than with someone else's schedule. One of the misconceptions people have when they first hear about releasing the timeline is that it sounds like giving up. If I don't push myself to meet deadlines, won't I just end up doing nothing? But there's a difference between deadlines and destiny. Deadlines can be useful tools for structure. Destiny is the illusion that your worth depends on meeting those deadlines in a specific order by a certain age. I once met a couple, Daniel and Priya, who were under intense pressure from their families to get married. They had been together for several years, and their parents were anxious for a wedding date. The expectation wasn't malicious, it was cultural. In their families, marriage by a certain age was seen as both a milestone and a duty. Daniel and Priya loved each other, but they didn't feel ready. They wanted more time to travel together, to save money, to explore career opportunities. At first, they tried to appease their families by setting a tentative date, but the closer it got, the more they realized they were doing it out of obligation, not desire. Finally, they made the difficult decision to postpone. It wasn't an easy conversation. There were tears, arguments, and a fair amount of disappointment from relatives. But months later, when we spoke again, Priya told me something important. I realized I'm not saying no to marriage. I'm saying yes to doing it at the right time, for the right reasons. We're still committed. We're just not on anyone else's stopwatch. That's what releasing the timeline looks like. It's not neglecting your responsibilities. It's fulfilling them in a way that's sustainable, meaningful, and aligned. Daniel and Priya still took care of their relationship, still planned for a shared future. They simply refused to let a cultural clock dictate the pace. Buddhism often speaks of right action, part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right action doesn't mean rushing. It means acting in a way that's skillful, compassionate, and grounded in clarity. Sometimes, the most responsible choice is to pause, to let a decision ripen, rather than forcing it to meet an arbitrary deadline. Releasing the timeline also requires discernment. Without self-awareness, letting go can slip into avoidance. You have to be honest about whether you're pausing because it's wise or because you're afraid. Fear-driven delays tend to shrink your life. Wisdom-driven pauses tend to expand it. I often suggest a simple reflection. If I remove the fear of judgment from this decision, what timeline would feel right to me? That question strips away the noise and lets you hear your own rhythm. When you release the timeline, but keep responsibility, life begins to feel more organic. You still show up for your commitments, your work, your relationships, your personal growth, but you stop measuring your progress against an artificial clock. You start making choices that reflect the reality of your life, not the fantasy of where you should be. Daniel and Priya eventually got married 3 years after their original deadline. By that time, they had traveled the world, grown in their careers, and built a financial cushion. Their wedding wasn't just a ceremony. It was a celebration of a partnership that had been allowed to mature naturally. When you live this way, you realize that time isn't something to beat, it's something to collaborate with. And the more you collaborate with time, the more it works with you rather than against you. Your unique rhythm. There's a moment in everyone's life when you realize, sometimes with relief, sometimes with frustration, that your path doesn't match the pace of anyone else's. This is the moment you start to glimpse your own rhythm. And once you see it, you can either honor it or spend the rest of your life fighting against it. We live in a world obsessed with synchronization. From early childhood, we're placed on standardized tracks, starting school at a certain age, moving through grades at a set pace, graduating by a certain date. This continues into adulthood, career milestones, relationship milestones, even unspoken rules about when you should settle down. It's like a conveyor belt that moves everyone along at the same speed. But here's the truth. Real life is not a conveyor belt. It's a landscape full of hills, valleys, detours, and resting places. And each person's journey moves through that landscape differently. Some move quickly through certain stretches and slowly through others. Some take winding paths that, from the outside, look inefficient, but lead to extraordinary destinations. I think of my friend Henry, a software engineer who didn't start his career until his early 32nd. Before that, he spent a decade working odd jobs, traveling, and playing music. To many people, it looked like he was behind. Old classmates were buying houses and climbing corporate ladders, while Henry was sleeping on couches in foreign cities, living on a shoestring. But Henry wasn't lost, he was learning. He was building resilience, adaptability, and a deep sense of curiosity about the world. When he eventually decided to study computer science, he brought with him a breadth of experience that made him a uniquely creative problem solver. Within 5 years, he had advanced faster than many peers who had followed the right path from the start. Henry's story is a reminder that pace is not the same as progress. Moving quickly in the wrong direction doesn't get you where you need to go, and moving slowly in the right direction is still movement. In Buddhism, there's an understanding that each being unfolds according to its own causes and conditions. Just as flowers bloom in different seasons, some in the first warmth of spring, others not until the final days of summer, people have their own timing for growth. You can't force a bud to open without damaging it, and you can't compare a late bloom to an early one without missing the unique beauty of each. Recognizing your unique rhythm requires two things: self-awareness and courage. Self-awareness to notice when you're pushing yourself to match someone else's pace, and courage to step out of that race and walk at the speed that's right for you. It also requires trust. Trust that even if your timeline doesn't make sense to others, it can still be exactly what you need. That trust is hard to come by when you're surrounded by voices telling you to hurry up or catch up. But every time you choose your rhythm over theirs, you strengthen it. Here's a practice. The next time you feel behind, pause and ask, behind compared to whom? Whose pace am I measuring myself against? And why should their pace define mine? When you start honoring your own rhythm, you also start to see that life has seasons. There are seasons for intense effort and seasons for rest, seasons for planting seeds and seasons for letting the soil recover. If you try to be in harvest mode all year long, you'll burn out. Your unique rhythm is not just about speed, it's about listening for the right timing in your life. It's about knowing when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to step back, when to accept stillness as a form of progress. Henry once told me, "I used to think I was slow. Now I realize I was just listening to the wrong music. I needed to find my own beat." That's what living in your unique rhythm feels like. It's dancing to a song that only you can hear, and discovering that your steps make perfect sense to the melody of your own life. The gift of pauses. In a culture that glorifies constant motion, pausing can feel like a luxury or worse, a failure. We've been conditioned to believe that slowing down means falling behind, that every moment not spent producing is a moment wasted. But in the natural world, pauses are not only normal, they're essential. Without them, nothing could grow. Think about the way seasons work. Winter is not a mistake. It's not the absence of life. It's a period of rest and regeneration. Beneath the frost, roots are strengthening. Seeds are gathering the energy they'll need to sprout in spring. If the earth never paused, the soil would be depleted and growth would eventually stop. Our lives work the same way. We need pauses, moments of rest, reflection, and recalibration to keep moving forward in a way that's sustainable. Without them, we burn through our energy and lose sight of why we were moving in the first place. I remember speaking with Leanne, a corporate executive who had been running at full speed for over a decade. She was used to the grind, early mornings, late nights, constant travel. Her calendar was so full that she joked she had to book time to eat lunch. When the company announced a mandatory 2-week shutdown over the holidays, Leanne was panicked. "I don't know how to not work," she admitted. At first, the pause was uncomfortable. She found herself checking her email out of habit, pacing the house, feeling restless. But as the days went on, something shifted. She started sleeping more. She took long walks without her phone. She cooked for the first time in months. And by the end of the break, she noticed she was thinking more clearly than she had in years. Leanne's story isn't unusual. Pauses can feel awkward at first because they force us to face the stillness we've been avoiding. When you stop moving, all the feelings, thoughts, and questions you've been outrunning have a chance to catch up to you. And that's precisely why pauses are so valuable. They give you a chance to meet yourself again. In Buddhism, pauses are built into the practice. Meditation is, in many ways, a deliberate pause from the constant doing of daily life. You sit, breathe, and simply be with whatever arises. At first, the mind resists, wanting to fill the space with plans, worries, or distractions, but with time, you start to notice that in the quiet, insights emerge. You begin to see what truly matters and what can be let go. Pauses are not the opposite of progress, they're part of it. Think of a musician playing a beautiful melody. The notes are important, but so are the rests between them. Without the pauses, the music would be a relentless wall of sound. The silence is what gives the notes their shape and meaning. The same is true in life. The pause after a big decision gives you time to integrate the change. The pause before responding in a heated conversation gives you a chance to choose your words wisely. The pause between projects allows you to reset your energy and intention before diving into the next thing. Pauses can also reveal paths you didn't know existed. When you stop rushing forward, you have the space to look around and see alternatives. Sometimes, what you thought was the only way turns out to be just one option among many, and not even the best one. Leanne told me that after her 2-week break, she realized she didn't want to return to her old pace. She negotiated a more balanced schedule, and her productivity actually increased. "I thought I was indispensable," she said, "but what I really was depleted." When you give yourself permission to pause, you're not stepping out of life, you're stepping into it more fully. You're allowing the moment to meet you instead of constantly chasing the next one. So the next time you feel guilty for slowing down, remember, the pause is not a weakness. It's the breath that allows the next movement to be strong, steady, and true. When time is no longer the enemy, for many of us, time feels like an adversary. It's something we race against, bargain with, or try to outsmart. We talk about beating the clock and running out of time, as if time itself were a predator stalking us. This mindset keeps us in a constant state of tension, always measuring the present moment against an imagined future. But what if time wasn't against you? What if, instead of being something to conquer, time could be a companion, one you walk alongside, rather than one you fight? This shift begins when you stop treating time as a rigid, linear track you must sprint down, and start seeing it as a flowing river you're already in. You can move with it, float in it, and even rest in its current. You can't make it go faster or slower, but you can choose how you experience the ride. I once met a man named Lucas, a ceramic artist who had spent years frustrated by the slow nature of his craft. "Everything takes so long," he told me. "From shaping the clay to drying to firing, it's just endless waiting." He saw the process as an obstacle between him and the finished product. Then one day, his kiln malfunctioned, forcing him to delay a large order by several weeks. At first, he was furious, but with nothing to push forward, he found himself lingering over the shaping process, experimenting with new textures, and enjoying conversations with fellow artists in the studio. By the time the kiln was repaired, Lucas realized he had fallen in love with the process itself. "I used to think the waiting was wasting time," he said. "Now I see it was the work." When you stop seeing time as the enemy, you also stop seeing pauses and delays as threats. They become part of the process, carrying lessons and opportunities you might have missed if everything had gone on schedule. Buddhism reminds us that clinging to a specific timeline is just another form of attachment. We want life to unfold according to our script because it feels safe. But the truth is, reality doesn't run on our schedule, and that's not a flaw in the system. It's what makes room for surprise, for growth, for paths we never could have planned. This doesn't mean abandoning all structure. Structure is still useful. It's what allows us to coordinate with others, to set intentions, to move forward with clarity. The difference is, when time is no longer your enemy, you can hold structure lightly. You can adjust when things shift, rather than breaking under the weight of unmet expectations. There's a story from the Zen tradition about a monk who asked his teacher, "How can I ever be free when I'm bound by the passage of time?" The teacher replied, "You are not bound by time. You are bound by your resistance to it." That's the heart of this practice, releasing resistance. You can't stop the river from flowing, but you can stop thrashing against it. You can stop obsessing over where you are compared to where you think you should be. You can stop turning every minute into a judgment of your worth. When you no longer see time as an adversary, you can start to inhabit the moment you're in fully. You can enjoy the meal instead of rushing to the next appointment. You can linger in conversation without worrying about losing time. You can let yourself rest without guilt, knowing that rest is part of the rhythm. Lucas now keeps a small sign above his workbench that says, "The clay will tell you when it's ready." He says it's a reminder not just for his art, but for his life. Some things ripen in their own time, and no amount of pushing will make them arrive sooner. And here's the paradox. When you stop fighting time, you often find you have more of it, not because the hours change, but because your experience of them does. The days feel less crowded, the moments feel fuller, and life stops being a race you're losing. So the invitation is this: let time be your companion instead of your opponent. Walk with it, trust its pace, and notice how, when you do, life begins to feel less like a countdown and more like a conversation. Shedding the mask of identity. The trap of roles and images. We all wear masks. Some we choose consciously, others are given to us so early we forget they're there. Over time, those masks can become so familiar that we mistake them for our real face. From childhood, we start receiving messages about who we are supposed to be. Maybe someone told you you were the smart one in the family, the dependable one, the troublemaker, the golden child. These labels can shape the way we see ourselves for decades, long after the original moment has passed. The problem isn't just that roles and images influence us, it's that we start to believe our worth depends on maintaining them. We learn to curate our behavior to protect an identity, even when it's no longer true or healthy or real. I once met a man named Adrian, who was known among his friends as the strong one. He was the person everyone called in a crisis, the one who could be counted on to stay calm, to fix the problem, to hold everything together. Adrian took pride in this role, but over time it became a prison. He stopped sharing his own struggles because he didn't want to tarnish the image. He stayed silent when he needed help, and isolated himself when life got heavy. The mask of strength had begun as a genuine quality, but it had hardened into a performance. And the more Adrian tried to live up to it, the more disconnected he felt from himself. Buddhism teaches that clinging to a fixed self is one of the roots of suffering. This doesn't mean you have no personality or values. It means that when you confuse a temporary role for your true identity, you create a fragile foundation. Any challenge to that role feels like a threat to your existence. The first step in shedding the mask is to notice it. Ask yourself, what role do I feel I must always play? What image do I protect at all costs? These questions aren't meant to shame you, They're meant to open the door to a different kind of freedom. Because the truth is, you are more than any single role. And the more you allow yourself to be seen beyond the mask, the more whole you become. When action is driven by ego, there's a certain kind of action that looks productive from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. You're doing all the right things, showing up early, working late, taking on more responsibilities, but the energy behind it isn't clean. It's not fueled by clarity or care. It's fueled by ego. Ego-driven action isn't always loud or boastful. Sometimes it's quiet and hidden, but no less demanding. It's the subtle drive to protect your image, to live up to a role, to make sure others continue to see you in a certain light. I remember a conversation with a doctor named Elise. She had built a reputation as one of the most competent and reliable physicians in her hospital. Patients adored her, colleagues respected her, and she was often the first to volunteer for difficult cases. But when I asked her how she was doing, her smile faltered. "Honestly," she said, "I'm exhausted, but I can't slow down. If I do, people will think I've lost my edge." For Elise, slowing down felt dangerous, not because it would harm her patients, but because it would challenge the identity she'd built as the tireless, unshakable professional. She wasn't just doing her work, she was performing the competent doctor every day. This is the trap of ego-driven action. You're no longer responding to what's actually needed, you're responding to the demands of the role you think you must play. You begin making choices to preserve the image rather than to serve the truth. And the longer you do this, the more disconnected you become from the authentic reasons you started in the first place. Buddhism offers a way to see through this. It teaches that the self we protect so fiercely is in fact a collection of memories, habits, preferences, and stories, not a fixed, unchanging entity. When we mistake this collection for something solid, we start defending it at all costs. Every criticism feels personal, every mistake feels like a threat, and every challenge becomes an opportunity to either prove or protect the self. I've seen this in creative work as well. A writer I know, Thomas, built his career on a particular style of storytelling. Readers loved it, publishers expected it, and over time it became his thing. But somewhere along the way, Thomas grew bored. He wanted to experiment, to take risks with his writing. Still, he didn't because he was afraid of confusing his audience, or worse, losing their approval. So he kept producing the same kind of work, even as it drained him. "I'm not writing from inspiration anymore," he admitted. "I'm writing to maintain my brand." This is the cost of ego-driven action. Your creativity, energy, and joy get funneled into maintaining a mask instead of exploring what's real. You stop asking, "What do I truly want to create or contribute?" and start asking, "What will keep my image intact?" Breaking this pattern doesn't mean rejecting your role entirely. Elise didn't need to stop being a doctor. Thomas didn't need to abandon his audience. But they both needed to reconnect with the part of themselves that acted from genuine intention rather than from fear of losing their identity. For Elise, that meant taking a sabbatical, a decision she initially resisted because she feared it would make her look weak. But during that break, she rediscovered why she'd become a doctor in the first place: to connect with patients, not to rack up impossible workloads. When she returned, she set clearer boundaries, took fewer shifts, and found that her care improved because she was no longer running on fumes. For Thomas, the shift came when he allowed himself to write one short story purely for himself, without worrying about whether it fit his brand. The joy he felt reminded him of his early days as a writer, and he began weaving more of that experimentation into his published work. When your actions are driven by ego, they often feel urgent but empty. When they're driven by intention, they may still be challenging, but they're nourishing. You finish the day tired in body, but not in spirit. The question worth asking is this: am I doing this because it's true, or because it keeps my mask intact? The more often you can answer true, the more you'll find yourself acting from a place of freedom rather than fear. Letting go of definitions to live honestly. There's a deep relief that comes the moment you realize you don't have to be exactly who you've always said you are. You can let go of the definitions, both the ones you've given yourself and the ones handed to you, and still be whole. In fact, you can be more whole without them. Definitions can be useful for communication. They help people understand aspects of us. I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, I'm an introvert. But problems arise when these descriptions stop being tools and start becoming cages. I once met a woman named Hannah who had been teaching high school science for 25 years. She was good at it, passionate, respected, and deeply committed to her students. Over the years, teacher became not just her profession, but her identity. It was how she introduced herself, how she thought of her worth, and how she measured her contribution to the world. When she began to feel burnt out and considered retiring, the idea terrified her. Not because she feared being bored or financially unstable, she'd prepared for those things, but because she didn't know who she would be without the title. If I'm not a teacher, she asked me, then what am I? That question reveals the trap of over-identification. When your self-worth is tied to a role, letting go of that role feels like losing yourself. So you hold on, even if it no longer fits, even if it costs you your health, your joy, your aliveness. Buddhism teaches that the self is not fixed. It's a constantly changing collection of experiences, thoughts, feelings, and conditions. When we cling to a rigid definition, we resist that natural flow. We refuse to allow ourselves to evolve. Letting go of definitions doesn't mean erasing your history or pretending your skills don't matter. It means holding them lightly, understanding that they're chapters in your story, not the entire book. For Hannah, the turning point came when she took a sabbatical and spent 6 months volunteering at a wildlife sanctuary. She discovered she loved working outdoors, caring for animals, and engaging in environmental education. By the time she returned, she saw that teacher was still part of her, but it wasn't the whole of her. She could teach in different ways, in different settings, and still feel like herself. When you loosen your grip on definitions, you give yourself permission to follow your curiosity. You open the door to roles, projects, and relationships that you might never have considered if you were too busy guarding the boundaries of your identity. It also allows you to live more honestly. You can admit when you've changed your mind, when something no longer fits, when your priorities have shifted. You no longer have to pretend for the sake of consistency. I once heard a Buddhist teacher say, "Consistency is not the same as integrity. Integrity is living in alignment with what's true now, even if it's different from what was true before." That's the heart of letting go of definitions. You allow yourself to be as you are now, not as you were or as you think you should be. Hannah eventually retired from formal teaching, But she didn't stop educating. She started leading nature walks for children, combining her love of science and the outdoors. "I thought I was losing myself," she told me. "But really, I was just changing shape." The question to ask yourself is, what definitions am I clinging to, and who might I be without them? The answer might scare you at first, but on the other side of that fear is a kind of freedom you can't experience while locked inside a label, no longer defined by outcomes. There is a quiet but powerful shift that happens when you stop letting outcomes define who you are. For many of us, this is not how we were taught to live. From early on, we learn to connect our worth with our results, the grades we get, the trophies we win, the promotions we earn. The world often reinforces this belief: praise when we succeed, disappointment or even shame when we don't. Over time, this conditioning creates a fragile sense of self. If your identity is built on your achievements, then every success becomes a lifeline, and every failure feels like an existential threat. You live on a roller coaster, soaring when things go your way, crashing when they don't. I once knew a marathon runner named Victor who embodied this pattern. He was disciplined, focused, and consistently placed in the top 5 of his races. Running was his passion, but it was also his identity. Friends introduced him as the runner, and Victor embraced the title. But then a knee injury forced him to withdraw from a major race. At first, Victor told himself it was temporary, but as the injury lingered, he began to realize he might never run competitively again. His mood darkened. He withdrew from friends. "If I'm not a runner," he told me, "then who am I?" Victor's struggle was not just about losing a hobby, it was about losing the mirror in which he saw himself. Without the external proof of his worth, he felt invisible, unmoored. Buddhism points directly to this trap. When you attach your sense of self to impermanent things, whether they are possessions, roles, or outcomes, you set yourself up for suffering. Nothing in life is guaranteed to stay the same. Roles shift, circumstances change, bodies age. Outcomes are influenced by countless factors beyond your control. The invitation is to root your sense of self not in results, but in the qualities you bring to whatever you do. Your sincerity, your presence, your willingness to keep showing up. For Victor, the breakthrough came when he started coaching young runners. At first, he felt bittersweet watching others do what he could not. But over time, he began to notice something. The joy he felt in mentoring had nothing to do with medals or times on a clock. It came from connection, from seeing his students grow in skill and confidence. By shifting his focus from performance to participation, Victor rediscovered the essence of why he had started running in the first place. It wasn't about proving himself, it was about engaging with life fully, moving his body, and sharing that passion with others. When you're no longer defined by outcomes, you can approach life with more freedom. You can take risks without fearing that a failure will erase your worth. You can try new things without worrying about how they will look if they don't work out. You can even choose to walk away from something not because you've given up, but because it no longer feels aligned. I've seen this in creative work as well. Artists who stop obsessing over sales often find their work deepens and evolves in surprising ways. Entrepreneurs who stop measuring success solely by revenue often build companies that are more sustainable and meaningful. Parents who stop judging themselves by their children's achievements often develop deeper, more authentic relationships with them. This doesn't mean outcomes don't matter. They can be useful markers and motivators, but they are not who you are. When they go well, you can enjoy them without clinging. When they go badly, you can learn from them without collapsing. The question to ask yourself is, if the result I want never comes, will I still value the way I showed up? If the answer is yes, you are free, because your worth no longer hangs on the fragile thread of external validation. Victor now says, "I'm not the runner anymore. I'm just someone who loves running, and that love can take many forms." That shift in language reflects a deeper truth. When you stop being defined by outcomes, you start being defined by presence. And presence is something you can carry with you, no matter what changes. Who are you without the labels? It's a disorienting question, one that can feel like someone just pulled the floor out from under you. Who are you without the labels? Without the titles, the achievements, the roles you've clung to, what remains? For many, the first reaction is fear. Labels give us structure. They tell us where we belong, how to introduce ourselves, what to expect from one another. Without them, the mind scrambles to find a new anchor. But if you can resist the urge to grab for another label, you might discover something much more stable than any title could offer. I remember meeting a man named Samuel at a silent meditation retreat. On the first day, the teacher asked us to introduce ourselves without mentioning our jobs, family roles, or accomplishments. Samuel hesitated. When it was his turn, he paused for so long that the group grew still, as if holding its breath. Finally, he said, "I'm not sure who I am without those things." That moment stuck with me. Samuel's honesty cut through the usual surface-level answers. Most of us would struggle in the same way. We've spent so much time building, polishing, and protecting our labels that we've forgotten they are not the whole truth. Buddhism teaches that what we think of as self is a collection of constantly changing experiences, thoughts, sensations, memories, relationships. When you cling to labels as if they were the self, you tie your peace to something that is both impermanent and external. It's like trying to anchor a boat to a cloud it might hold for a moment, but sooner or later it will drift away. Letting go of labels doesn't mean erasing your history or denying your skills. It means loosening your identification with them. You can still be a teacher, an artist, a leader, but those are things you do, not the entirety of who you are. The freedom in this is enormous. Without labels dictating your behavior, you're free to respond to life as it is, rather than as your role says you should. You can admit when you don't know something without fearing it will ruin your image. You can make unconventional choices without worrying whether they fit your brand. I once worked with a woman named Felicia, a successful corporate lawyer who was known for being fiercely decisive. It was a label she carried with pride until her mother became ill, and she found herself in a situation where she didn't know the right answer. She told me it was one of the hardest moments of her life, not just because of the family crisis, but because it shattered her image of being the one who always knows what to do. When Felicia allowed herself to step out of that label, something shifted. She could say, "I don't know," without shame. She could listen more, ask for help, and share the weight of decision-making. She realized that not knowing didn't make her less, it made her more human, more connected to the people around her. The question, "Who are you without the labels?" invites you to meet yourself in a deeper way. You might find qualities you've overlooked because they didn't fit the role you were playing. Tenderness in someone known for toughness, creativity in someone known for logic, vulnerability in someone known for leadership. Here's a simple practice. Take a piece of paper and write down all the labels you currently identify with: parent, entrepreneur, athlete, helper, friend, leader. Then, one by one, imagine setting each aside. As you remove them, ask yourself, what remains? You might feel a sense of loss at first, but beneath that is often a quiet relief. The pressure to perform a certain identity starts to lift. You begin to realize that there's a you that has been here all along, watching, experiencing, living, regardless of the labels in play. Samuel, the man from the retreat, told me at the end of the week that he'd started to feel lighter. "It's like I've been carrying a heavy backpack full of names for years," he said. "I didn't realize how heavy it was until I set it down." When you stop clinging to labels, you don't disappear. You don't become nothing. You become more fluid, more adaptable, more alive. You can be fully yourself in any situation because you're no longer squeezing into the narrow frame of who you think you're supposed to be. And maybe that's the real answer to the question. Without the labels, you are simply here, aware, breathing, free, and that is enough. The power of letting go and trust. Skillful means, when not acting, is the most powerful action. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is nothing. Not because you're indifferent, not because you're afraid, but because you understand that the wrong action, taken at the wrong time, can close doors that patience would have kept open. In Buddhism, there is a concept called upaya, or skillful means. It's the art of responding to each situation, not with a fixed rule, but with wisdom and precision. It asks, what will actually reduce suffering here? What will lead to more clarity, more connection, more truth? We often think of action as inherently good. Do something is the default response to discomfort. But action for its own sake can be reactive rather than responsive. It can come from the need to fix our own anxiety rather than from the reality of what the situation needs. I once knew a woman named Grace who learned this the hard way. A close friend of hers was going through a painful breakup. Grace's instinct was to offer advice, to help her friend see reason, to encourage her to move on quickly. She sent long messages full of tips and pep talks, thinking she was helping. But over time, she noticed her friend pulling away. One day, the friend told her gently, "I know you care, but right now I don't need solutions. I just need you to sit with me in this." Grace realized that her constant action, her need to fix, was more about her discomfort with seeing someone she loved in pain than about what her friend truly needed. In trying to help, she had made her friend feel pressured, even unheard. That's where skillful means comes in. Sometimes the skillful action is to pause, to let the dust settle, to wait until the right words or steps become clear, instead of forcing them out of urgency. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult situations or refusing to take responsibility. It means understanding that timing and approach matter as much as the action itself. Like a gardener who knows when to prune and when to leave the plant alone, skillful means is about working with life rather than against it. The paradox is that non-action, when chosen consciously, is still action. It's a decision, a powerful one, not to contribute to chaos, not to escalate tension, not to add noise where silence would serve better. The next time you feel the itch to do something, immediately pause and ask, am I acting because it's truly needed, or because I can't tolerate the discomfort of waiting. Often, the power of letting go begins right there in choosing not to force the next move before it's ready to be made. Noble silence, the strength in stillness. Silence is often misunderstood. In a noisy world, it can be seen as weakness, avoidance, or passivity. We're encouraged to speak up, to share our thoughts, to fill the gaps in conversation. But in Buddhist practice, there is a discipline called noble silence, and it reveals a very different truth. Sometimes stillness is the strongest stance you can take. Noble silence is not about suppressing your voice or hiding from conflict. It is the conscious choice to refrain from speaking or acting in ways that would add confusion, escalate tension, or obscure the truth. It's a kind of restraint that comes from clarity, not from fear. I once attended a retreat where noble silence was practiced for several days at a time. At first it felt awkward. My mind was full of things I wanted to say, comments, questions, small jokes. But as the hours passed, I started noticing details I would have missed if I'd been talking. The sound of leaves brushing against the window, the weight of my feet on the wooden floor, the subtle expressions on people's faces. Silence began to slow me down enough to actually be present. I realized how often I spoke just to fill space, to manage how others saw me, or to avoid sitting with my own discomfort. Without words to hide behind, I had to meet whatever arose inside me: boredom, impatience, restlessness, and let it move through without reacting. Outside of retreat, noble silence can be just as powerful. I remember a client named Jordan who was in the middle of a heated workplace dispute. Emails were flying, accusations were being made, and the temptation to defend himself was overwhelming. Every part of him wanted to set the record straight immediately. Instead, he chose to wait. He took a day to breathe, to gather facts, to consider what outcome he actually wanted. When he finally responded, his words were measured, calm, and free of the defensive edge that would have made things worse. The issue de-escalated, and bridges that might have been burned were left intact. That's the strength of stillness. It creates space for wisdom to enter. When you stop reacting out of impulse, you allow yourself to see more clearly what is needed and what is not. In relationships, noble silence can also be an act of love. When someone you care about is upset, the instinct might be to jump in with advice, reassurance, or counter-arguments. But often, the most healing thing you can offer is your full, quiet presence, to listen without interrupting, to witness without trying to fix. This is not easy. Stillness can feel unbearable when emotions are high, but over time, you begin to trust that silence is not the absence of care. It's a form of care that honors the other person's space to process, and your own space to respond thoughtfully. Noble silence also strengthens your relationship with yourself. When you choose stillness, you start hearing the undercurrent of your own mind. You notice the patterns of thought that drive your reactions. You see the fears, the assumptions, the old stories that shape your words before you even speak them. And in seeing them, you have the chance to choose differently. In a world where speed and volume often dominate, practicing noble silence is a quiet rebellion. It says, "I will not be rushed into words I don't mean. I will not speak just to be seen. I will let my stillness speak for me until I am ready to move from truth, not from ego." The next time you feel pressured to respond instantly, whether in an argument, an email, or even a casual conversation, try pausing. Let the silence hold you. See what changes when you give space for clarity to arrive before your words do. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Into being, you are not alone. There's a quiet but transformative truth in Buddhist teaching. Nothing exists by itself. This is the principle of interbeing, a term popularized by the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. It means that everything is connected to everything else, that no person, plant, or moment can exist in isolation. We live in a culture that praises self-reliance. We are told to stand on our own 2 feet, to be self-made, to succeed without leaning on anyone. And while independence has its virtues, it can also feed the illusion that we're separate from each other, from the world around us, from the support that's always quietly holding us up. When you begin to see through the lens of interbeing, this illusion softens. You realize that even your smallest actions are woven into a vast web of causes and conditions. The food you eat exists because of farmers, soil, rain, and the people who transported it. The chair you sit on was shaped by human hands, tools, and knowledge passed down for generations. Your very breath is made possible by trees and oceans, producing oxygen. I once met a man named Marco, who ran a small bakery in his neighborhood. He took great pride in saying, "I built this business myself." And yes, he worked hard, very hard. But during a community storytelling event, someone asked him to name all the people who had contributed to his success. He began listing: his grandmother, who taught him to bake; the friend who lent him money to rent his first shop; the carpenter who built his counters; the farmers who grew his wheat. By the end, he laughed and said, "I guess I didn't do it all myself after all." That's the heart of interbeing. It doesn't diminish your effort, but it humbles and expands your perspective. You start to see that your life is supported by countless seen and unseen hands. When you truly understand this, trust becomes easier. You stop feeling like you have to control everything, because you realize you're not carrying the load alone. You are part of a living network, and that network can hold you. This understanding also changes how you see others. When someone is struggling, you stop assuming it's because they didn't try hard enough. You start to notice the conditions that shape their life: opportunities, resources, health, timing. You recognize that if you had lived their life with their exact set of conditions, you might be where they are too. Interbeing also dissolves comparison. If life is a vast web, then your role is not to compete with another thread, it's to strengthen your own, so the whole web is stronger. When someone else succeeds, it doesn't take away from you. It benefits the entire network you're part of. In my own life, the most vivid experience of interbeing came after a personal loss. I was grieving deeply, and for weeks I felt numb, disconnected. Then one evening, a neighbor knocked on my door with a pot of soup. Another dropped off fresh bread. Friends sent messages, not with platitudes, but simply to say, "I'm here." None of these gestures erased the grief, but together they reminded me that I wasn't facing it alone. My pain was mine, but I was still held in the arms of community. Seeing through the lens of interbeing doesn't mean you become passive. It means your actions are informed by the awareness that you are part of something bigger. You plant seeds not just for yourself, but for the field. You speak not just to express your truth, but to contribute to the conversation of the whole. You rest not only to recover your own strength, but to be ready to support others when they need it. The next time you feel isolated or burdened, pause and look around. Think of the hands that built the space you're in, the people who've crossed your path, the forces of nature that make your life possible. Let that awareness soften the belief that you're alone in this. Because the truth is, you've never been alone, not for a single moment. You are with everything. And when you trust that, letting go becomes less frightening. You can release your grip, knowing the web will catch you. Renunciation. Letting go to come home. The word renunciation can sound severe. It can conjure images of monks in remote monasteries, giving up all possessions and comforts, turning away from the world entirely. In the modern mind, it often carries a sense of loss, deprivation, or even punishment. But in the Buddhist tradition, true renunciation, nakahama, is not about rejecting life. It's about releasing what weighs you down so you can live more fully within it. Renunciation is not an act of self-denial for its own sake. It's an act of clarity. You see what no longer serves your well-being, your integrity, or your growth, and you choose to set it down. You don't let go because you should. You let go because you finally see the cost of holding on. I once knew a man named Daniel who had spent most of his career chasing promotions in a high-pressure corporate environment. The money was good, the prestige even better, but he was always tired physically, mentally, emotionally. His phone buzzed with work messages late into the night. He traveled so often for business that his apartment began to feel like a hotel. When his doctor warned him about the health consequences of his stress, Daniel brushed it off. But then, one evening, he arrived at an important client meeting and realized he had forgotten the names of 2 key executives, something that had never happened before. He laughed it off in the moment, but inside, something cracked. In the weeks that followed, he began asking himself hard questions. What am I actually working for? Is the life I'm building one I even want to live in? The more he looked, the clearer it became. The status, the paycheck, the constant proving they weren't worth the erosion of his health, his relationships, or his peace of mind. Daniel didn't renounce his career entirely, but he did renounce the version of it that demanded constant sacrifice of his life outside work. He left the big firm and started consulting on his own terms, taking fewer clients but doing deeper work with them. His income dropped, but his freedom soared. "It's like I came back to myself," he told me. That's the essence of renunciation. It's a homecoming. It's the recognition that the weight you've been carrying isn't essential to who you are, and that putting it down doesn't make you less, it makes you lighter. Buddhism sees clinging as the root of much suffering, and renunciation is the deliberate act of loosening that clinging. This can apply to tangible things, possessions, status symbols, but also to less visible burdens, grudges, unrealistic expectations, the need to be seen a certain way. In my own life, one of the most powerful acts of renunciation was letting go of the constant need to be on in every interaction. For years, I thought I had to always be insightful, entertaining, or impressive in conversation, but over time, it became exhausting, like holding a pose that my body no longer wanted to sustain. When I began allowing myself to simply be quiet, to listen more than I spoke, I realized how much deeper my connections could be. I wasn't performing anymore. I was present. Renunciation often begins with discomfort. There's a period where you feel the absence of what you've let go, and you might even doubt whether you made the right choice. But if you stay with it, that empty space begins to fill with something subtler but more nourishing. Spaciousness, clarity, and a sense of alignment with yourself. This spaciousness is what allows you to come home. You're no longer scattering your energy across countless obligations or anxieties. You're rooted again in what matters. And from that place, your actions become cleaner, more intentional, and more sustainable. It's important to remember that renunciation is deeply personal. What one person needs to set down might be something another person can carry with ease. The point is not to follow a prescribed list of what to give up, but to look honestly at your own life and ask, what am I holding that is holding me back? Daniel's answer was a certain kind of career path. For me, it was the performance of constant competence. For you, it might be a toxic relationship, an outdated ambition, or a habit that numbs more than it nourishes. The act of renunciation is an act of trust. Trust that you will still be enough without the thing you've set down. And over time, you come to see that you're not just enough, you're more yourself than you've been in years. Letting go isn't the end of the story. It's the clearing of space for the next chapter to emerge. Trust, the ground beneath letting go. Letting go is rarely just about the act of releasing. It's about what you believe will catch you when your hands finally open. Without trust, letting go feels like falling into an endless void. With trust, it feels like stepping onto solid ground you couldn't see until you moved. In Buddhism, trust is not blind faith. It's not about believing that life will always go your way or that nothing bad will ever happen. It's a grounded confidence in the nature of things, that change is constant, that you have the capacity to meet what comes, and that you are not as alone in the journey as you might think. When you trust in this way, you can loosen your grip without feeling like you're surrendering to chaos. You know the river has a current, and that current has carried countless beings before you. You know that even if the path ahead is unclear, each step will reveal the next. I once met a woman named Aisha who embodied this kind of trust. After 15 years in a stable corporate job, she decided to leave and start a small cafe in her neighborhood. Friends and family warned her about the risks, the financial uncertainty, the competitive market, the long hours. Aisha listened to their concerns but moved forward anyway. She told me later, "It wasn't that I wasn't afraid, I was terrified, but I trusted two things: my ability to learn as I go, and the community I was part of. I knew I could ask for help if I needed it." That trust became the foundation she stood on during the inevitable challenges, when the cafe's plumbing failed in the first month, when a supplier backed out last minute, when a pandemic forced her to switch to takeaway service. Each time, she adapted, not because she had every answer, but because she trusted that answers would come. Trust allows you to let go without collapsing. It's the knowledge that you don't have to control every detail, because you're not walking this road entirely on your own. It's the understanding that even in failure, there is learning. Even in loss, there is connection. Even in endings, there is the seed of a beginning. This doesn't mean trust eliminates discomfort. Letting go can still bring moments of uncertainty, grief, or doubt. But trust gives you a wider frame. It reminds you that discomfort is not the whole story, that life is bigger than this moment, and you are bigger than this fear. In my own life, I've noticed that trust grows in small steps. It's built every time I face a challenge I thought I couldn't handle and discover that I could. It deepens each time I reach out for help and find someone willing to meet me. It strengthens whenever I allow space for life to unfold without rushing to fill it. One way to nurture trust is to look back at your own resilience. Recall times when things didn't go as planned, but still turned out in a way that served you or taught you something essential. See how often help came from unexpected places. Remember that you've been here before, in one form or another, and you made it through. Another way is to practice releasing in low-stakes situations. Let someone else choose the restaurant. Skip checking your phone for an hour. Allow a conversation to have a pause instead of rushing to fill it. These small acts remind your nervous system that loosening control doesn't lead to disaster. It can actually bring relief, even joy. When you make trust your ground, letting go stops being a one-time leap and becomes a way of walking. You stop bracing for the worst and start leaning into the rhythm of life. You stop gripping the steering wheel as if the entire journey depends on your hands alone, and you start noticing the scenery, the passengers, the road itself. Aisha's cafe is thriving now, but she says the real success isn't the business, it's the way she lives. I still plan, she told me, but I don't strangle my plans. I trust myself, I trust my people, and I trust that whatever happens, I'll meet it. That's the power of letting go and trust together. One frees your hands, the other assures your heart. And when they meet, you find that the ground beneath you was never missing. It was simply waiting for you to step onto it. Epilogue. The quiet freedom you've been looking for. If you've walked with me through these chapters, you've already felt it, the loosening of the grip, the slowing of the breath, the space that opens when you stop fighting life and start meeting it. We began by looking at control, how the constant effort to hold the world in your hands leaves you tired and brittle. We saw that caring deeply is not the same as clinging tightly, and that you can give your whole heart to something without strangling the outcome. Then we explored desire, discovering that not all wanting is the same. Craving, tanha, makes you restless, always chasing the next thing, while wholesome desire, chanda, lets you act from fullness, not from lack. You learned that your motivation matters as much as your actions, and that fullness from within changes everything. In time, we saw how invisible clocks and cultural timelines keep us racing without asking where we're going. You discovered your own rhythm, the power of pauses, and the relief that comes when time is no longer your enemy but your companion. We turn to identity, peeling back the masks we've worn for years, the roles, labels, and outcomes we've mistaken for ourselves. You saw the courage it takes to say, I am more than this mask, and the freedom that comes from not letting any single definition contain you. Finally, we arrived at letting go and trust the ground beneath all of it. We saw how skillful means can turn non-action into the wisest action, how noble silence speaks louder than noise, how interbeing reminds you you're never alone, how renunciation clears the space for your true self to come home, and how trust makes letting go not a fall, but a landing. And through it all, a single thread has run quietly under every word. You don't have to force life to love it. You don't have to grip the river to be carried by it. You don't have to earn your peace at the end of some perfect outcome. Peace is available now, in the way you meet this moment. The journey is not about doing nothing. It's about doing from a different place, from clarity instead of fear, from wholeness instead of lack, from trust instead of control. So as you step away from these pages, remember, when the urge to force rises, pause, Feel the ground beneath your feet. When craving pulls you forward, ask what's really driving you. When time feels like it's slipping away, return to your own rhythm. When a label feels too tight, dare to loosen it. When you let go, let trust catch you. This is the quiet freedom you've been looking for, not a life without challenges, but a life where challenges no longer own you. Because you've learned the art of caring without clinging, moving without forcing, and trusting the river enough to let it carry you exactly where you need to go. The rest will come.